Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, aka the Football History Dude, and I'm here to tell you about an awesome way for you to rub elbows with your favorite podcast hosts here on the Sports History Network, while at the same time rooting for your hometown team this upcoming NFL season. You've been hearing all about our partner, Tailgate Fantasy, the past few weeks. Well, dig on this. Tailgate created a special Sports History Network league for our listeners, so we can put the word fan back into fantasy football together. It's free to join, and if you do so before the season kicks off, you'll automatically be entered into a drawing for a free t-shirt from one of our other partners, Home Field Apparel. It's a win-win-win! So hurry up today and head to sportshistorynetwork.com/tailgate for all the details. Again, that's sportshistorynetwork.com/tailgate.
We get to learn about a new perspective on who the greatest coaches of all time are and some of the greatest NFL players of all time. Michael Lombardi, former NFL executive and player personnel director, strategist, and talking head, comes on to talk about his new book, Football Done Right, and some of the ways he would change the game and some of the greats that played it. Coming up in just a moment.
This is the Pigskin Daily History Dispatch, a podcast that covers the anniversaries of American football events throughout history on a day-to-day basis. Your host, Darren Hayes, is podcasting from America's North Shore to bring you the memories of the gridiron, one day at a time. So as we come out of the tunnel of the Sports History Network, let's take the field and go no huddle through the portal of positive gridiron history with pigskindispatch.com.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hello, my football friends. This is Darren Hayes of PigskinDispatch.com. Welcome once again to the Pig Pen, your portal to positive football history. And listeners, we are in for a treat tonight. We are going to be talking about some football history by a gentleman that's wrote a book. Really needs no introduction, but I'm going to introduce him anyway this way because it's such a great resume. He has a very unique perspective on evaluate the legends of professional gridiron. He's been a part of some of the greatest teams and worked with some of the most influential people in the game's history. Michael Lombardi has worked as an NFL executive and strategist with the San Francisco 49ers of the 80s, the Cleveland Browns, Philadelphia Eagles, the Oakland Raiders, and the New England Patriots, alongside NFL legends including Bill Belichick, Bill Walsh, and Al Davis. Michael Lombardi, welcome to the Pig Pen.
Thank you, Darren. I appreciate it. I love the picture behind you. Yeah. The ball was not traveling very far in the air in that game. I can tell you that.
No, that's an 1896 Lafayette and Penn game where Park H. Davis, a historian, was the coach of Lafayette, and he brought in a ringer named Fielding H. Yost, who ended up coaching at Michigan.
I love it. And that's the crowd behind it there, too. Are those fans in the stands there?
Yeah, that was Penn was on like a 21-game unbeaten streak, and they brought in that ringer. Lafayette did, and they knocked them off, and I think Penn Quaker fans are still mad about that one 100 some years ago. Well, we're not going to go back quite that far in football history. Now, Michael, you wrote a book recently, and I'll let you introduce the book, and we'll give you an opportunity to do it again at the end and tell people where they can purchase it at.
Well, I wrote a book called Football Done Right. It's a kind of I would say it's a love affair that I've had with football, and it's a way to describe some of the things that we're seeing today through the coaches that made this game great. I talk about what I call the white oaks, which are the 5 coaching trees that I think the foundation of the league was built on. Then I give a criteria for what it should take to get into the Hall of Fame for a coach. And then I rank the top 10 coaches. And then I kind of take a journey through all the things that we love about the NFL, television, trades, the draft, and then ending it with the top 100 players of all time, ranked 100 to 1 from different eras, and try to tell a story about each player that may not be known when the reader gets to it. So it's a book through the ages. It was a labor of love for me. It was the game through my eyes as how I see it.
Yeah, it's really fascinating because you also put some of your own perspective and personal stories that maybe you had with some of these individuals. Like I know the Sid Gilman one, I thought that was kind of funny.
Yeah.
He was thinking, Vincent.
I can still hear him saying to Esther, I got Michael Lombardi on the phone, and she would yell in the background, tell your sister I said hello. And I'm like, I'm not that Michael.
I thought that was hilarious. And you also have some pop culture mixed in there too. Especially right in the beginning of the book, you're talking about, Shawshank Redemption to get us into the White Oaks story, which I found that fascinating, very connective to the reader, for at least to this reader. I thought it was great.
Thank you.
You did it.
Yeah, so, I think to me, the one benefit that I've had in life has been when I started. I'm so old that when I started in the league, we weren't quite as far as that picture, but we only had 16 millimeter tape. And so if you were a scout in the 60s, 70s, and the early 80s, you had to write a report. And in that report, you had to describe a player to the person reading the report that they may never see until they see him that day when he shows up on campus. And so you had to be very descriptive of the report, because there was no way. Today, I could turn around here and I can watch every NFL game I want to watch, right? I could put it on. But then you couldn't. And so that helped me become a writer. That helped me become a writer and love writing too.
You talk about all these different generations of football that you've experienced out in the NFL, and from the executive level on down. What are some of the things maybe that are challenging more to the general managers and the coaches today that maybe weren't so much in the 80s and vice versa?
Well, I think the salary cap has a huge influence, right? And the way that we've changed generationally, when I grew up, it was always team first. Now we've got Instagram, we've got Twitter, we have an eyes mentality, and it's harder for the coach to bring together the team element to the game. I think that's the struggles that we get through to. How does a player keep his individuality, but yet blend into the team and not offend the team? I think that's really important. So, I think that is, and look, the reason I made Paul Brown the number one coach of all time in the book is because the game would not have advanced the way it advanced if coaches weren't full-time coaches. Because back when he was there, they were part-time. They were selling insurance in the winter. They were, teaching school. They were doing different things to support themselves. And when he said, you're going to be a full-time, and it's a full-time job, you're going to work this 24/7, all of a sudden curiosity sets in, and people start saying, okay, why don't we try this? Why don't we do that? And the game exploded. And that's how the trees really became something. I mean, one of the things college had the advantage over pro football was when Red Blake was coaching, they were full-time. They were West Point or at the Dartmouth. Whereas in the pros, once the season was over, you went to go find a job. So that allowed more ingenuity to happen.
Your White Oaks, I mean, I think you're spot on with this. And do you mind if we share with
them? No, talk about the book, sure.
Okay, yeah, you have Colonel Blake, Clark Shaughnessy, which I thought was a great pick. Of course, Paul Brown, Sid Gilman, and Bill Walsh. Now, those are some great trees. I think you're spot on with that.
Well, I think you being a historian too, you're more of a historian than I am. But I think to me, Shaughnessy is an unknown player in this whole game. I mean, when Joe Burrow deposits his check, he doesn't even know who Clark Shaughnessy is, and the position of quarterback would have never existed without Clark Shaughnessy. The T formation comes in because of this brilliant man. It's a great story I tell in the book. Shaughnessy could coach anything. He could coach offense or defense, right? And he was a head coach, but he was an offensive mind. But a few years, he was the defense coordinator for the Bears. And they're getting ready to play the 49ers with Frankie Albert in the early 60s. And Frankie Albert had introduced, Red Hickey had introduced the shotgun formation. And it was taking the league by storm. I think the 49ers were undefeated at the time, and the Bears were 3-1. It was a big game early in the season. And Red Hickey had this shotgun. And Clark Shaughnessy, as the defense coordinator of the Bears, decided to double A-gap pressure the quarterback. Now, back in the early 60s, they did not have protections to handle that. So these guys, there was man protection. I got you, you got me, right? I'm going to block. But when who's the center block? If I block this guy, who blocks him? They didn't have any rules. And Shaughnessy, literally after that game, that was the end of the shotgun until Landry brought it back to create a way to block it from that inside pressure. So this was the brilliance of Shaughnessy. He was just a tactician and a strategist, and we wouldn't have the game we have today if it wasn't for him.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And you explain it so well in there. And listeners, you got to grab a copy of the book and listen to what Michael's saying in this, because it really makes a lot of sense. And something else that I found extremely fascinating is your perspective on the criteria for putting coaches in the Hall of Fame. I don't know if it was intended just for the coaches. I know that's the section you talked on it. And yeah. I think that's really great. If maybe you could touch on some of those points.
Well, I think it's unfair. I think it's really been unfair for coaches that like, for example, Marty Schottenheimer is the 8th winningest coach of all time. He coached 21 years in the league. He's got 200 wins. He's got a 61% winning percentage. Okay. There's only 8 people out of the 521 coaches that have been called head coaches in the NFL, or whatever the league was called before, the American, that only 8 have 200 regular season wins. If you're one of 8 out of 521, you're an elite class. And if you're an elite class, you belong in the Hall of Fame. So that bothered me. That really bothered me. Dan Reeves, he's got over 200 wins. He's got a 53%. He hired, he took 2 different teams to Super Bowls, and he can't get in. So for me, I think the problem, so my background's in personnel, right? And everybody thinks finding talent is just you go out on the road and you look for talent. No, finding talent's about eliminating. So you have a criteria of what you want. That's my training. So I wanted to build a criteria for coaches that if you don't qualify for this, you can't even be in the conversation. And, and so therefore there's no more debate. You have to have this winning percentage. You have to have this, and so what I laid out were my criterias, and I put present day coaches. I put coaches that are in the Hall of Fame, coaches that are in the Hall of Fame that don't meet the criteria. I put everybody in there so people could see it, and understand it. And I don't think it was fair that, George Allen's one Super Bowl appearance takes precedent over what Dan Reeves did or what Marty Schottenheimer did. I think to me that becomes really unfair. And I think if we're going to have an elite category, then we got to put people that do elite things in.
Yeah, I agree with you. And you mentioned a couple other coaches too that are very deserving, and Buddy Parker and George Seifert too. Along with Schottenheimer and Reeves and Mike Holmgren too. I think you
I mentioned Holmgren. I mean, Buddy Parker, he won 2 titles we would not have nickel defense without Buddy Parker. George Allen takes credit for it, but it was Buddy Parker. We would not have 2-minute offense if it wasn't for Buddy Parker. The situational football wouldn't have been there with Buddy Parker. It's the same thing with what I write about with Coryell. It's interesting. Coryell's 41st on win list. Buddy Parker's 42nd. It's the same thing I write about. If you're not understanding how this game evolved, it's really not fair. I mean, George Allen got in because he had an incredible winning percentage, 71% wins. He went to one Super. He only coached 12 years. Which is I'm not saying he doesn't belong in, but poor George Seifert coached 11 years, has a 64% winning percentage, won 2 championships, and he doesn't even come up for a ballot.
Yeah, and I think Buddy Parker is up for ballot this year.
Well, I think he's got to get voted in, but I think he was the one guy from the old timers, or what do they call that? That's being represented. He got pushed in front of him.
Yeah, and that's just recently, within the last couple of weeks, I think. This summer, at the Hall of Fame. So you were a prognosticator here, writing a book about, I'm sure, before that to help.
Well, he deserved to be in long ago. It's like it's unfair that he's in there. And again, I'm not trying to take anyone out of the Hall. I'm not. That this book is not a trying to say this guy doesn't belong. The only person that I don't believe belongs in the Hall of Fame, is the Washington Redskin owner, George Preston Marshall, because he was clearly kept African-American players out of the league from 36. He did not sign a African-American player until the 60s with Bobby Mitchell. And he really hurt the league, and yet we honor him, and I think that's wrong.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people who agree with you on that too. Now, you also talk about 100 players, which it's an extremely difficult thing to do, to limit when you have thousands to choose from over 100 years in professional football. And maybe we could start off, because I know what a tough job it is to do of doing some rankings myself, but maybe if we could start off a couple things that players that I found surprising that weren't on the list.
I love it.
Okay. And maybe you can help explain, the criteria, how people got in. I mean, the first one that sort of jumped out at me is Red Grange. Seemed like, you had a lot of people that were impactful. Maybe they didn't have the greatest stats in the world, but the NFL, Red Grange was one I was surprised.
Yeah. I don't think I knew. And, to me, it was how do I get them all in from different eras? And I think that became the problem. I thought the one that I kind of should have put in was Steve Van Buren. I think he was the one from an era that maybe I didn't give enough credibility to. Look, Red Grange, nobody's going to argue he's not a great player. I'm not going to argue that. But I think to me, what I started with was a list of 150, 175 names, and I built the draft board based on it, and that's kind of, and I had it, and I knew 100 was going to be Kenny Washington, not because he was a Hall of Fame player, but he was a Hall of Fame person. And we would not have football in the NFL in Los Angeles if it wasn't for Kenny Washington. So I wanted to make a statement with him. But I think to me that's why I love the fact that you bring this up, because I think what will happen is it brings conversation. It brings conversation to the table. And I think we need conversation, right? I think it's important. Van Buren started 83 games. He played in 83 games. He started 64. He could run the ball. He was a receiver. He was a runner. He did so many things, but I didn't think he was, even though he led the league in rushing 3 years in a row, I thought the career wasn't long enough, but it was dominating enough. And that was my dilemma, and I wanted to put Sterling Sharp in my top 100, who had the same issue.
A couple other players. Now, one's a little bit selfish because I'm going to tell you, I'm a Pittsburgh Steelers fan.
Oh, what Steeler did I miss? Tell me which one I missed.
Polamalu, I think Paul, because he was a game changer, sort of that hybrid linebacker safety, sort of changed the game, changed, offensive schemes because of what he did. And that's my selfish one. One that a player I really appreciated and I think was at the top of his game was Marcus Allen. And maybe that's one that, it's a little sketchy. That's borderline. I understand.
Yeah. I think I decided between, as I look at my notes here, it was between Palomar and Kenny Houston in my top list. I think that's kind of where I got a little bit, and I went with Houston because he played, the Pro Bowls, he 13 years in the league. I love Palomar. I think they're all great, but we didn't keep stats on Houston back then, right? We didn't keep that. And it was hard. And I think to me, when you go to, I think the deciding factor was Houston went to 12 Pro Bowls and he went to, in his 13-year career, in the time that he played. So that was the hard one for me to get through. And what did he have? I think he had, I'm looking at he had 49 interceptions and Palomar had 32.
Yeah, I understand, but he was more the hybrid part of it as well.
And look, the guy that I think, to me, the guy that I hope you enjoyed it since you're a Steeler fan. If you read the Rod Woodson write-up.
Oh, absolutely, and especially putting him in number 26, his jersey number. I thought that was that was brilliant. So yeah.
I think he belongs in the top 25. I really do. I just couldn't squeeze him in there. I think he was a unique player. I think he belonged in the elite category. I don't think people really appreciate how great of a player he was. In terms of the ability to intercept pass. Look at it. He played 15 years. He had 71 interceptions. People might talk about Ronnie Lott. To me, was unbelievable. Woodson had 12 touchdowns too. He's a 4-down player
and a returner. Yeah,
that's what I mean. He's a 4-down player. Yeah. Woodson had 11, and his impact was felt. But I really feel like Rod. I hope I did Rod well in terms of that, because I think he really is something special.
Yeah, looking at the players you had ahead of them, I don't have any gripe with where you had Woodson. I'm glad you had him on there. But a couple players that you had in the top 5 that you had personal experience, you saw them play, you dealt with them on a day-to-day basis. These are the 2 GOATs, that everybody considers, and that is with Tom Brady and with Jerry Rice. I thought those. I'd like to hear.
I look. Jerry could have been higher too. I know people in San Francisco give me crap for not having him higher. I mean, there was nobody like Jerry. Jerry was an incredibly conditioned athlete. His hands were unbelievable, and Brady's competitive stamina, his will to win, and his. I mean, look, he left the game still playing at a high level. I mean, think about that. And and the other guys in the top. I mean, Ronnie Lott, to me, was, if I had to say who was your favorite player of all time, I would say Ronnie Lott, because he was truly the driving force between the dynasties. Montana was an incredible player, an incredible competitor. Ronnie Lott was the engine that drove the machine. Nobody was going to have to deal with Ronnie. Ronnie was going to run the team. And Ronnie was mean. He was great. He was instinctive. He had all the things you want. He played corner. He was selfless. I mean, it just, and so it was hard. I mean, I feel like I idolized Ronnie. And I don't think I put him high enough.
Well, I think that everybody that's a football fan idolizes him, because anybody that can hit like he did and, lose part of a finger in a game and come back in the game, that's a player there. That's somebody you got to give respect to. Michael, if you could go ahead again and let's give the title of your book.
Title is Football Done Right. You can buy it at any one of your favorite bookstores online. I'm sure it's in every bookstore wherever you buy books in Erie, Pennsylvania, or anywhere. And it's also available on Audible, and it's available on the Kindle. So you can get it everywhere. It just came out a week ago. So it's been out about a week, 10 days, a week ago. It came out September the 5th. So it's been out about a week. And I hope everybody will take a walk down memory lane with me and enjoy it.
Yeah, it's a great book, great perspective, and you did an excellent job on it. I didn't mean to throw those players at you to fuss.
I loved it, Darren. That's the
conversation.
When you write a book like this, you're going to get people that are going to ask you. And I've done a lot of radio interviews for this, and people in Philly, you only had one Eagle on the list. Well, okay, who did I miss? Well, you should have had Brian Dawkins on the list. Okay, Brian Dawkins, a good player, played 15 years in the league. I mean, kept a lot of stats. We did, but he had 37 interceptions. Kenny Houston played, is different than him. So, I don't know what to tell you. They had 37 interceptions, and they threw the ball more in his era than they threw it when Kenny Houston was playing, and he had 49.
Yeah, that's true. It's true. Well, Michael, I know you got to go. You got a lot of things going on here. We're on a football night, and you got a lot of stuff happening. But we appreciate the time you took with us, and we appreciate you preserving the football history in this great book. So thank you.
Thank you. Let me know. Let me know when this goes up, Darren, and I'll certainly put it on my social media channels and promote it.
I absolutely will. Thank you.
Thank you.
Peeking up at the clock, the time's running down. We're going to go into victory formation, take a knee, and let this baby run out. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you back tomorrow for the next podcast. We invite you to check out our website, PigskinDispatch.com, not only to see the daily football history, but to experience positive football with our many articles on the good people of the game, as well as our own football comic strip, Cleat Marks Comics. PigskinDispatch.com is also on social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel to get all of your positive football news and history. A special thanks to the talents of Mike and Gene Monroe, as well as Jason Neff for letting us use their music during our podcast.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com. Hey there, Sports History fan. This is Arnie Chapman, a.k.a. the Football History Dude, and I wanted to thank you for stopping by to listen to another episode here on the Sports History Network. Our podcasters are passionate about uncovering and sharing sports stories from yesteryear. And if you didn't know it already, we have over 30 shows across the network covering all sorts of sports history topics. In fact, here's a glimpse into one of our awesome podcasts here on the network.
Each week, the official Football Learning Academy podcast will take you deep into the history of pro football through interviews with players, coaches, or administrators in the NFL, as well as interviews with Pro Football Hall of Fame selectors, authors, and historians. You'll learn how the game evolved and important moments that shaped the sport into what it is today. And don't miss the Pro Football History Nugget of the Week. Listen to the official Football Learning Academy podcast on the Sports History Network.
How about that? I bet you're super hyped to go listen to that new podcast, right? Well, to learn about this show and all the other podcasts on the network, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com/podcast. Again, that's sportshistorynetwork.com/podcast. Head over there today to find your next favorite sports history podcast.